It was a cold and rainy night on the streets of New York. The stars hid behind the dense clouds, leaving the alleys of the city plunged in darkness. The tall buildings cast ominous shadows over the empty streets, and the biting wind whispered dark secrets between the dark corners. In this bleak setting, beggars sheltered under torn blankets and cardboard boxes, desperately seeking to escape the relentless cold that permeated the night. Among them was a lonely woman, known only as Elizabeth. His steps were silent, and his tired eyes reflected the pain of a life of deprivation and disillusionment. She wandered the dark alleys, her empty stomach growling with hunger and her bare feet aching with every step taken. Her thin body was wrapped in dirty rags, the only protection against the biting cold of the night. Tired and desperate, Elizabeth huddled in a dark corner, seeking a little shelter from the icy wind that cut through the night. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of worries and fears as she struggled to stay warm and safe in the darkness of the night. She knew that life on the streets was a daily struggle for survival, where each day brought with it new challenges and imminent dangers. It was then that she heard a faint sound coming from a nearby garbage dump, a soft, distant cry that cut through the silence of the night. With a strange feeling, Elizabeth slowly approached, her heart pounding in her chest as she prepared for what she might encounter. When she got close enough and lifted the lid of the bin, her eyes widened in disbelief and shock. There, among the debris and dirt, was a newborn baby, wrapped in dirty rags and shivering from the cold. Her face was pale and her eyes still closed, but her faint cry echoed through the night, a grim reminder of the cruelty of the world around her. Elizabeth's heart broke at the sight of the baby abandoned there, completely vulnerable and helpless. Without hesitation, she knelt next to the baby and took him in her arms, wrapping him with all the care and tenderness that she had in her heart. She could feel the fragile warmth of the baby's body against her chest, and an instant bond seemed to form between them. It was as if the universe had brought them together that dark night, and they were destined long ago to share their lives in ways Elizabeth could never have imagined. "Oh, little one, who did this to you? Don't worry, I'll protect you." With the baby safe in her arms, Elizabeth slowly stood up and looked around, seeking help in the darkness of the night. She knew she couldn't just leave the child there to die, abandoned and alone in the cruel world of the streets. She committed herself at that moment to protect and care for that defenseless little being, even if it meant facing the world alone. As she walked through the dark streets, the baby fell asleep in her arms. Elizabeth felt a sense of determination and courage that she had not experienced for years, as if it were a rebirth. She knew the journey ahead would be difficult and full of challenges, but she was willing to face them head-on, fueled by the love and compassion that now inhabited her heart. And so, she set off into the unknown, hoping for a better future for herself and the baby she had saved from the darkness of the cold night. Upon arriving at her humble abode, a makeshift cardboard house in an alley practically deserted except for the other residents in their makeshift homes, Elizabeth was greeted by those who lived there. The place was taken over by people who shared the same precarious living condition, each struggling to survive another day in the harsh reality of the streets. As Elizabeth approached, holding the baby in her arms, the curious and suspicious glances of the other residents turned to her. Some were sitting around makeshift campfires, while others huddled in small groups, exchanging stories and sharing what little they had. "What is this that you carry in your arms, Elizabeth?" asked one of the residents, his voice charged with curiosity and suspicion. He was a middle-aged man, with a face marked by time on the streets and the tired eyes of those who have seen too much. Elizabeth looked at the baby in her arms, tenderly protecting him from the night cold. "It's a baby I found on the street, abandoned and alone. I couldn't just leave him there to die," she replied, her voice firm and determined. The other residents muttered to each other, exchanging meaningful glances as they processed Elizabeth's revelation. Some seemed incredulous, unable to comprehend how anyone could take responsibility for another life when they could barely take care of themselves. "You're crazy, Elizabeth. How can we think about caring for a child when we barely have enough for ourselves?" said a younger woman, her voice tinged with disdain. Elizabeth ignored the cruel comments, her determination unwavering in the face of disbelief from the other residents. She knew her decision to save the abandoned baby was the right thing to do, even if it meant facing the judgment and disapproval of others. "This is no time for that. I need to feed him. Anyone have some milk?" One of the subjects confirmed it, saying he had some and handed it to her, but told her, "You should give it to someone you can care for. Think carefully about what you're doing."
"No.
"Not that. I'll never give it up." While the residents continued to question her choice, Elizabeth went into her cardboard little house, protecting the baby from the cold and darkness of the night. She knew the journey ahead would be difficult and full of challenges, but she was determined to give her baby a better chance at life, even if it meant facing the world alone. Inside her makeshift little house, Elizabeth held the baby in her arms, cradling him gently by giving him some milk in a spoon. Despite the uncertainties and difficulties that awaited them, she felt an instant bond with the child, an unconditional love that propelled her to face the unknown with courage and determination. And so, under the rainy sky, Elizabeth and the baby fell asleep together, united by the bond of love and compassion, ready to face the challenges that life on the streets would bring. Elizabeth grew up in a poor family, in a humble neighborhood of Greater New York. From an early age, she learned the value of hard work and solidarity, as her parents strove to provide for the family with dignity. However, tragedy befell them when Elizabeth was still young. Her mother passed away after a long battle with a serious illness. With the death of her mother, Elizabeth was forced to take early responsibility. His father, a hardworking man, struggled to care for the children alone, but the grief and financial difficulties brought on mainly by the long period of illness became overwhelming. Elizabeth, then only 15 years old, found herself facing challenges beyond her maturity. Elizabeth's life took an even more drastic turn when she found out she was pregnant at the age of 16. She had become involved with an older man who tricked and charmed her with false promises while she was working in a small diner. When she told him about the pregnancy, the man disappeared without a trace. The news was a severe blow to her and her family, already burdened by the still recent loss of her mother. Elizabeth's father, in desperation, refused to accept the pregnancy, insisting that she should get rid of the baby to avoid further hardship for everyone there. It would be the wisest thing to do, as she could not afford to feed one more mouth. Desperate and without support, Elizabeth had no choice but to follow her father's advice. Impressed by everyone, when the baby was born, she gave him up for adoption, completely heartbroken by the pain of separation. However, Elizabeth never forgot the baby she had to leave behind. Guilt and sadness haunted her constantly, and she wondered if she could ever find redemption for what she had done. She closed herself off emotionally, withdrawing from the world around her and hiding her pain behind a mask of apparent normalcy. Obviously, she never fully recovered. Without medical assistance, much less psychological, she ended up going to the streets after the death of her father just a year after disposing of her own son. Even on the streets, it was as if that act continued to haunt her day after day, not letting her go about her life with a bit of normalcy. That is why, that night, upon finding the abandoned baby, she swore to herself that she would not give him to anyone. In the first months after finding the abandoned baby, Elizabeth plunged headlong into the challenge of raising the child while struggling more than ever to survive on the streets. If before she acted carelessly and seemed not to care about anything, now she was determined to raise the little child in the best possible way. But obviously, if before it was difficult, now it was even more. Each day brought with it new obstacles and difficulties. But Elizabeth was determined to give the baby a better chance at life, even if it meant facing the world alone. The nights were especially difficult, with the baby crying from hunger and discomfort as Elizabeth tried to calm him down with what little she had available. She improvised bottles with water and sugar, desperately searching for milk to feed the baby's hungry little stomach. During the day, Elizabeth roamed the streets in search of food and shelter, carrying the baby in her arms while begging for alms and searching for food scraps in the street dumps. Each step was a struggle against tiredness and exhaustion, but Elizabeth never gave up, fueled by love and determination to give her baby a better life than the one she knew herself. The other people on the streets watched Elizabeth with curiosity and admiration, impressed by her dedication and sacrifice on behalf of the baby. Some offered help occasionally, sharing food and clothing that could help Elizabeth and the baby cope with the difficulties of life on the streets. But not everyone was so supportive, especially those who were next to her. Some of the homeless mocked Elizabeth, saying that she was crazy to take responsibility for another life when she could barely take care of herself, doubting his sanity, threatening that Elizabeth the police. They questioned her decision to raise the baby in the precarious conditions of the streets, suggesting that he would have a better life in an orphanage or with a foster family, and she refused to listen to that, saying that she would never lose that new gift from heaven. Elizabeth ignored the cruel comments. Her determination was unshakable in the face of adversity. She knew she was doing the right thing by caring for the baby, even if it meant facing judgment and disapproval from others. As the months passed, Elizabeth and the baby began to form a routine, finding comfort and safety in each other on the unforgiving streets of the city. The baby, though, grew strong and healthy under Elizabeth's loving care, her bright eyes reflecting the hope and love he found in her lap. Despite the difficulties and deprivations, Elizabeth never lost faith in the future. She believed that with love and determination, they could overcome any obstacle that life presented to them. And so, night after night, under the starry sky, Elizabeth and the baby fell asleep together, hoping that the next day would be better. It was in this way that little by little the boy grew up under her loving care. Each day brought with it new challenges and learning, but also moments of joy and tenderness that filled the hearts of Elizabeth and the baby. Elizabeth devoted herself entirely to the welfare of the boy, facing the difficulties of life on the streets with courage and determination. She improvised bottles of water and sugar, scavenged for food in the street trash, and begged alms to make sure the boy had everything he needed to grow strong and healthy. As time passed, the baby began to turn into a child full of life and curiosity. His bright eyes explored the world around him, absorbing each new experience with enthusiasm and admiration. He loved to joke with the other homeless people, laughing and smiling as he ran through the streets, his infectious laugh filling the air with joy. Elizabeth watched the boy tenderly, marveling at his resilience and determination in the face of adversity. She watched him grow and blossom before her eyes, her love for him growing with each passing day. Despite the difficulties and deprivations they faced, they had each other, and this was enough to meet any challenge that life presented to them. As the boy grew up, he became more and more independent, exploring the world around him with curiosity and courage. He learned to talk and walk, his first words and steps being celebrated with joy by Elizabeth and the other homeless people who after a period stopped confronting her and shared in her journey as well. But not everything was easy. They still faced hunger, cold, and the uncertainty of the future, struggling to survive in a world that often seemed to be against them. Elizabeth knew that life on the streets was a daily struggle for survival, and often stopped eating for days so that the boy could feed himself. But she was determined to give the boy a better chance at life, even if it meant facing the unknown with courage and determination. After years of fighting in the streets, when little Mattia was already 4 years old, Elizabeth received the news that a small house would be made available by the government for her and the boy. It was a small ray of hope amid the darkness and uncertainty they had faced for so long. With hearts full of gratitude and hope, Elizabeth and Mattia moved into their new home, leaving behind the cold, unforgiving streets that had been their home for so long. The small house was far from perfect, but it was a much safer place than the thin cardboard walls on the street, and also much more welcoming for them to start their lives over again together. Upon entering the house for the first time, Elizabeth felt a comforting warmth spread through her body. She looked around, admiring the freshly painted walls and the simple but comfortable furniture that filled the small space. It was a modest place, but it was theirs, and that was all that mattered. The boy ran around the house, exploring every corner with childish enthusiasm. Her eyes sparkled with joy as she discovered the new little corners to hide in. Elizabeth smiled to see him so happy, her soul filling with gratitude for what they had received. But despite the joy of having a roof over their heads, Elizabeth knew they would still face many challenges ahead. The house was small and simple, and they had little more than the basics to survive on. There were still bills to pay, food to buy, and challenges to face. But now they had a place to call home, a safe haven where they could face the challenges of life together. As night fell on the small house, Elizabeth and the boy snuggled in their beds, grateful for the blessing of the new dwelling. Despite the difficulties they would still face, they knew they were together, and that was all that mattered. One day, already at the age of 6, while Mattia was playing on the street in front of her modest house, a black limousine caught the boy's attention. His eyes widened in surprise as he saw the luxury car slowly pass by them. A shiver ran down his spine as he watched the limo make its way down the almost dark street. Realizing that he was being followed, he began to run, until he entered the house, desperate, calling for his mother. "Mom, look, a car," exclaimed the boy, pointing to the car that was quickly moving away down the street. Elizabeth looked up, surprised to see the limo pulling away. A strange feeling came over her as she watched the car go out of sight. Weird. What would a limo be doing around here? She muttered to herself. The boy shrugged, his curiosity quickly replaced by thoughts of returning home. Elizabeth tried to forget that as she started to prepare dinner, and Mattia played on the floor next to her. But his heart was still troubled by the strange appearance of the limousine. The next morning, while Elizabeth was busy preparing breakfast in the kitchen, the boy ran to the door, his breath caught at the sight of the black limousine parked outside. His heart started beating fast as he ran back inside the house. "Mom, look, the limo is back," he exclaimed, his face pale with fear. Elizabeth felt a tightness in her chest as she heard the boy's words. She knew something was wrong. With hesitant steps, she approached the door, her heart pounding hard against her chest. As she opened the door, she came across the black limousine, its impassive driver waiting outside. "What do you want?" Elizabeth asked, her voice trembling with apprehension. The driver didn't say a word, just held out an envelope to Elizabeth before quickly driving away, leaving her alone on the sidewalk with the little boy by her side. With trembling hands, Elizabeth opened the envelope and took out a letter that was inside. His eyes raced through the handwritten words, his heart sinking as he read each word. It was a message from the boy's biological father, Andrew, asking to meet them and talk about the boy's future. Elizabeth swallowed hard, a sense of fear and uncertainty settling in her chest as she tried to figure out what to do next. "What's that, Mom? What does the letter say?" asked the boy, his voice trembling with fear. Elizabeth looked at him, her eyes full of worry and uncertainty. "Yeah, it's not sweet at all, don't worry. Adult problems." Elizabeth felt a lump form in her throat as she tried to process the words of the letter. She looked at Madia beside her, seeing the fear and confusion stamped on her innocent face. She knew she needed to act cautiously to protect her son. "Let's go in, honey." The boy nodded, his eyes still fixed on the limousine driving ahead. Together they returned into the house, where Elizabeth firmly closed the door behind them, as if to ward off the dangers of the outside world. Sitting at the kitchen table, Elizabeth held the boy's hand tenderly, trying to find the right words to explain the situation. "Honey, do you remember I told you about when I found you?" The boy nodded, his face serious as he remembered the stories Elizabeth had shared with him about her tumultuous past. "Your father. Looks like he's here, trying to find us. But I want you to know that we're safe here and that I'll do anything to protect you, okay?" The boy nodded, a mixture of fear and confidence reflected in his eyes. He trusted Elizabeth, knowing she would do everything in her power to keep them safe. As Elizabeth tried to calm the boy's fears, a sense of determination grew within her. She knew she needed to face Andrew and find out what he wanted. She could not allow the fear of losing the boy to paralyze her. He wasn't even sure if that was in fact the boy's father, and why he would only return now after so many years and having abandoned the little boy. The next morning, when Elizabeth finally decided to leave the house to face the unknown, she told Madia to wait for her at home and not leave there in any way, and leave the doors locked, remaining silent. She then came across the black limousine parked again in front of her door. Her heart leaped in her chest as she stared at the gleaming car, her thoughts swirling around the possible consequences of her impending encounter with Andre. Elizabeth hesitated for a moment in front of the black limousine, feeling a whirlwind of conflicting emotions inside her. She did not know what to expect from this meeting with Andrew, the boy's biological father. So many questions swirled in her mind, but she knew she needed to find answers to protect her son. With hesitant steps, Elizabeth approached the gleaming car, her heart pounding in her chest. The driver quietly opened the door, revealing the luxurious interior of the limousine. Elizabeth swallowed hard and, with one last backward glance, got into the vehicle. The interior of the limousine was opulent and comfortable, a stark contrast to the humble life Elizabeth led. She sat on the soft leather bench, trying to ignore the nervousness that consumed her. "Mr. Andrew is waiting for you. He wants to talk. Don't worry." As the limousine began to move, Elizabeth looked out the window, watching the cityscape pass quickly before her eyes. Her heart was heavy with worry, but there was also a spark of hope that she couldn't ignore. Finally, the limousine stopped in front of an elegant mansion. Elizabeth swallowed hard, feeling small and out of place before the grandeur of the place. She exited the car cautiously, her eyes scanning the surroundings for signs of danger. Andrew was waiting at the entrance of the mansion, his face serious and tense as he watched Elizabeth approach. Their eyes met, and Elizabeth saw a mixture of emotions reflected there. Regret, sadness, determination. "Elizabeth, thank you for coming," Andrew said, his voice soft and charged with emotion. Elizabeth nodded, her voice failing a bit when she finally found the courage to speak. "Why did you come to us, Andre? What do you want from us?" Andrew sighed, looking tired and worn out by life. "Please, let's talk in my office." And so they did, entered the grand mansion, and proceeded to Andrew's office, a luxurious and comfortable place. "Well, I think you should have a lot of questions." "Yes, I have." "Why? If it really is your son, why only now decided to look for him after having abandoned him?" "I can explain. 6 years ago, I was newly married. My wife was pregnant, however, I was deceived. She said that she had lost the baby in a miscarriage. I never suspected. But that night she left with him in her womb and returned without. She had thrown him in the trash." "And why did you only look for him now?" I only knew a short time ago what happened. I always believed the story she told me. However, we ended our relationship less than a year ago, and it was on that day of the breakup that he told me, using it as a weapon to hurt me. Elizabeth looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. She knew she couldn't just ignore it all, but she also knew she needed to protect her son above all else. But tell me, how did you find us? When I heard what had happened, I was desperate. It was the most terrible nights of my life. I imagined that he had died abandoned. But, as if a light came, I thought that he could have saved himself somehow, so I started running after him, without a correct direction. But I went into hundreds of alleys and alleys, talking to people. It was months of searching, and I was already completely losing hope, until finally someone told me, 6 years ago a woman who lived there had found and raised a baby she had found in the trash. It filled me with hope again, and more than ever I knew I was on the right track. I asked if they knew where this woman lived, and they didn't know how to inform me, but with her name and the child's name it became an easier search, until finally you were located. Me. I need some time to think about all this, Andrew. I can't just take such an important decision like that overnight and hand it over. He is very attached to me. Andrew nodded, his expression sad but resigned. I understand, Elizabeth. Please take as long as you need. But know that I don't want to take it away from you in any way. That would be terrible. I want you to come with him. I want you both to live here too. I'll be here, waiting for a chance to make things right this time. With these words they said goodbye, each going his own way. Elizabeth returned home with a mind full of conflicting thoughts and emotions, knowing she would have to make a decision that would change the course of their lives forever. The fact was that Andrew was able to raise the boy in a way she could never have, but still she was afraid of being gradually taken away from her son. Upon returning home, Elizabeth was plunged into a sea of tumultuous thoughts. She knew she had a difficult decision ahead of her, one that would affect not only her own life, but also that of the boy she had adopted and loved as her own son. As she sat in the corner of the small room, watching the boy play on the floor next to her, Elizabeth found herself torn between the desire to protect her son and the possibility of giving him the opportunity to meet his real father. She knew very well what it was like to lose a son and not know where he was anymore. Because of this, she felt a pang of compassion for him, an understanding that everyone deserves a second chance, because she herself would give all the little she had to have the chance to look her son in the eyes again. However, fear and uncertainty still weighed on his heart. She couldn't simply ignore the potentially dangerous consequences of allowing Andrew into their lives. What if he hurt the boy in some way? And if he took her away from her son, he had money and power for it. It could be a treacherous trap. These thoughts haunted Elizabeth for days on end, as she tried to find a solution to the harrowing dilemma she found herself in. She knew she needed to trust her intuition and follow what she thought was best for her son, even if it meant facing the unknown and making difficult decisions. Then, on a quiet night, as the boy slept beside her, Elizabeth finally made a decision. She knew she couldn't let fear rule her life forever. She needed to be brave, both for herself and for the boy who depended on her to protect him. The next morning, Elizabeth contacted Andre, expressing her concerns and hesitations, but also leaving a door open to the possibility of moving in with him. She knew it was a risky step, but she also felt it was the right thing to do. Elizabeth and the little boy left home, ready to face the future together, regardless of what fate had in store for them. And as they walked down the street, the sun shining high in the sky, Elizabeth felt a sense of renewed hope filling her heart. With Mattia by her side, Elizabeth set off towards the mansion where Andre awaited them. His steps were determined, but his heart was full of apprehension. She knew she was entering uncharted territory, but she also knew she needed to face this challenge head-on, out of love for the boy she had sworn to protect. When they arrived at the mansion, Andre welcomed them with open arms, his face illuminated by a warm and sincere smile. Elizabeth watched the interaction between father and son with mixed emotions. She saw the joy in the boy's eyes as he recognized the man who had brought him into the world, and she also saw the gratitude in Andrew's eyes as he finally got the chance to redeem himself. As she watched the scene before her, Elizabeth knew she had made the right decision. She saw that the love and connection between father and son was really real, and she knew that nothing could replace that special bond. Despite the difficulties and uncertainties that were yet to come, she felt a sense of peace and fulfillment as she watched her son finally find the missing piece in his life. In the first week at Andre's mansion, Elizabeth and Matthias faced a real whirlwind of emotions and challenges. Accustomed to the harsh routine of the streets, the luxury and comfort of the mansion seemed almost surreal to them. Every room, every elegant piece of furniture, and every hearty meal was a new and thoroughly disconcerting experience. Matthias was fascinated by everything around him. He explored every corner of the mansion with wide eyes, not believing any of it. The manicured gardens, spacious bedrooms, and even luxurious bathrooms were like something out of a dream for him. Each new day and new toy he discovered filled his eyes and made him not want to wake up from what he was living. However, along with the charm came confusion and discomfort. Elizabeth felt out of place in that sophisticated environment, as if she did not belong to that world of opulence. She felt grateful to have a roof over her head and food on the table, which allowed her more time with her son, but at the same time she felt insecure and out of place in this new reality. She wondered if she would be able to fit into that life of comfort and privilege after so many years living on the streets. Meanwhile, Andre did his best to help Elizabeth and Mattia feel welcome and comfortable in the mansion. They treated them with kindness and respect, doing their best to show that they were there to help them adjust to their new life. Little by little, Andre was bonding with the boy, first as a good friend, not wanting to pressure him to treat him like his father, since he knew it would take time. However, despite everyone's efforts, the transition was not easy. Elizabeth and Mattia faced moments of anguish and uncertainty, struggling to adapt to a reality so different from the one they were used to. But little by little, with the support and guidance of Andre, they began to find their place in that new family and to glimpse a future full of possibilities. Life became comfortable, Mattia grew and even put on weight, wore good clothes, and that made Elizabeth extremely happy to see her son being a real child, although the marks of the past were still obviously carried forever and ever. She also soon reassured herself about Andre and Mattia's relationship, realized that he was not invasive and did not try to take it away from her either. Things seemed to be going very well, until one day, standing in the huge living room at night, Elizabeth observed some framed photographs on the wall. They seemed to be of Andre as a child. At that moment, Andrew entered the room and Elizabeth inquired of him. "Andrew, tell me, why did you want your son so much? Don't get me wrong, but where did the strong desire to be a father come from? Do you see these two in the picture with me, child?" "Yes, I am. These two are my adoptive parents. I was abandoned as a baby. I lived in an orphanage for a few long years, until they adopted me. I know how it feels to have no parents. That's why I went after my son. And that's why I know that him being by his side is the best thing for him. Especially since I lost my parents a few years ago. I couldn't just leave it as it was." At that moment, Elizabeth began to cry. "What is it? Are you well? Was that something I said?" "No, don't worry about me." Then Elizabeth told him about her son she had to give up more than 36 years ago, and that she still couldn't forgive herself for it. Andrew comforted her, saying that she had done what she could with what she had in hand, and that she had already done something great in caring for a boy she had met. She should forgive herself. At this moment, the eyes of both crossed as if for the first time, and Elizabeth looked deeply into his eyes, and as if slapping them, both asked themselves at the same time, "Is it?" They both went to sleep with that thought disturbing them. Until a few days later, Andre took courage and asked Elizabeth if she felt the same. She said yes, and that was how they decided to do a DNA test. Days later, with the test results in hand, Elizabeth and Andrew sat down together to receive the news. Silence hung taut in the air as they opened the envelope that might reveal the truth to them. Elizabeth's hands trembled slightly with nervousness, while Andrew held his breath, looking forward to the outcome. As they read the results, a wave of overwhelming emotion enveloped them. Tears welled up in Elizabeth's eyes, and a trembling smile formed on Andrew's lips. The DNA test confirmed Elizabeth and Andre were mother and son, reunited after years of separation. The revelation deeply shook Elizabeth and Andrew, but also brought a sense of indescribable relief and gratitude. Elizabeth cried copiously, while Andrew hugged her, trying to calm her down. Finally, she had found her son again. After so many years of uncertainty and loneliness, the reunion had come from her grandson, found by chance or by the work of God. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders, and she could finally begin to heal the wounds of the past together. With tears in their eyes and hearts overflowing with emotion, Elizabeth and Andre hugged each other tightly, sealing the bond that united them as mother and son. And with Mattia, now her mother's grandson. Thank you very much to those who have supported the channel financially through the link in the comment pinned. This helps me to bring more and more stories to you. And don't forget to like and also subscribe to continue receiving the new stories.